everybody. Welcome to windconductor.org. I'm really excited to introduce the next guest to you. A good friend of mine. I've known Paul Murtha for a number of years and knew him first as a trumpet player. Well, I guess I can't say that because I played some of his compositions and arrangements in my band before then, but an amazing trumpet player, great guy, wonderful composer and arranger. Paul, thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, Aaron, how you doing?
Good, doing fantastic. So you just recently moved down to North Carolina.
Yeah, I retired from the Army band in 2016 and was living in Northern Virginia. The kids are all out of the house. My wife and I are using basically 3 rooms of this big house. We're like, what are we doing? So we put the house on the market and it sold in one day, and we said we're moving to North Carolina.
That's awesome.
We've been down here full time since August of 2018. Right before the big hurricane hit, we moved in. So, but we love it down here.
That's cool. It's a great area. I was telling you earlier that I grew up in the Wilmington area of North Carolina, and I love the coastal region.
Yeah, it's beautiful, and the people are great. I've actually found a couple of groups down here to start playing with, which is, good to keep the horn on your face, and you meet musicians in the area, like-minded people. So yeah. I was a little worried about that, but I found a couple of groups that are a lot of fun to play with.
That's awesome. So let's talk about your career, because most people on the Wind Conductor site probably know you as the composer Paul Murtha, and not necessarily the trumpet player Paul Murtha, although they should, because
you're too kind, man.
I've always said, man, you've always had the tastiest solos on the jazz gigs that we played, man.
Well, you're too kind. You're too kind. Believe me. Every time I finish a gig, I want to throw the horn in a river or put it in front of the car and run over it.
Yeah,
it's a love-hate relationship.
Yeah, most as is with most musicians and their instruments.
Yeah. Yeah.
So talk to us a little bit about your time with the Army Band, because you were the composer for some amazing groups up in that area, and how did that all come about?
Well, first of all, I'll say this: I'm an arranger by trade. I'm an arranger who composes under duress. I need a commission check and a deadline to compose. It's so much harder for me to do that. It takes so much longer. I would rather take a tune that you wrote and mess around with it. I'm an arranger. That's the thing I love to do. But I do like composition. It's just so hard. But my first gig with the Army, I auditioned on a lark for the West Point Band, which is the Army's premier band that's up at the U.S. Military Academy, about an hour north of D.C.
Great band.
I mean, an hour north of New York City,
right.
Excuse me. And I had been playing up and down the East Coast like 6-7 nights a week, everywhere between Boston and Atlanta as a trumpet player. And my wife and I decided that we wanted to have children. My first child was on the way. I'm like, well, if I'm going to be a dad, I can't be traipsing around the countryside. I need to be around. And I was talking to a friend of mine about this, and he said, well, they're looking for an arranger at the West Point Band. I'm like, what's the West Point Band? I had never heard of it. Turns out it's this wonderful group. It's got a long history, goes back before the Revolutionary War. But long story short, I sent in a packet of some charts that I had written. They invited me to come up and audition. The audition was kind of crazy. I showed up, and they took me around and gave me a tour of the Military Academy campus. They let me hear the different ensembles. And I was under the impression that it was like a college group. It's United States Military Academy. It's
right.
Basically a college for people who want to be in the Army. And I see these older guys. And the guy who's taking me around is a sergeant major. And I looked and I said, what's with the old guys? I thought these were college kids. And he goes, oh, no, this is a professional band. Some of these people have gone to Eastman, University of North Texas, you name it. And I heard the band. I'm like, oh, okay, I get it. Really great band. So they let me hear that concert band, marching band, jazz band, a couple of brass quintets. And they handed me a stack of West Point centric music and said, okay, go home or go back to your hotel tonight. Show up here tomorrow. We need a concert band opener.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so I went back to the hotel. I got a large pepperoni pizza, a six pack of Heineken, and I had this stack of music. And I went back and I'm like, okay. And their direction was we need 30 seconds, big fanfare. Then we need a timpani roll. There's going to be an announcement, and we go into the national anthem, the key of B flat. I'm like, okay. So I'm having my Heineken, I'm having my pizza, and I come up with the ideas. And this is before the computer stuff. I brought a keyboard with me and a bunch of score paper. So the next morning, 6 o'clock in the morning, they had a team of about 6 or 7 people who were going to help copy the parts. And at 10 o'clock, I had to go conduct the band with what
Oh,
I had
wow.
written. So they get the parts there, and I go out and conduct the band, and they play through it. It sounds pretty good. And they start tapping their feet. And I'm like, oh, geez, what did I do? And I said something to the guy who was taking me around. He goes, that means they like it. So I said, okay, that's good. So then they said, okay, go back to your hotel, write a marching band fanfare to be played on the field. And same deal, tomorrow morning we'll have people copy it, come in and conduct the band. So I did that. Then the third day, they said, go back to your hotel, write 32 bars of a big band tune, come in, run the band. So I did that. I forgot to mention that when I went up for this audition, I had long hair. I had hair, but I cut it. I'd been playing in bands. I took the earring out. I put on a suit, the whole deal. And so after those 3 days, they asked me if I wanted the gig. I said, well, I don't know. Do I have to join the Army to get this job? And they said, yes, you do. I said, I can't get it as a civilian. They just started laughing. So I was just about to turn 30 years old, had a kid on the way, and they said, we'll offer you the job, but you have to go through basic training, like
Yeah.
17 and 18-year-old kids. So I did that, and it was the greatest decision I ever made, besides marrying my wife.
Yeah.
So I did 6 years at West Point as their chief arranger, got a lot of great experience, marching band, concert band, jazz band, small ensembles. They have the cadet glee club, which I also got to write for them.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. In a beautiful area. I mean, you're right on the Hudson River. My little office looked out over the Hudson. It was beautiful. So I did that for 6 years, and then started to get a little antsy. Wasn't used to being in one place too long. And an opening came open in DC, and I auditioned for that. I sent down a packet, and I met Mark Taylor, who was the chief arranger there at the time. A lot of you folks will know him as a jazz arranger, but he was in charge. And I met him at a Pizza Hut in Woodbridge, and we had pizza and beer. And he looked at my charts and he said, "Yeah, okay, you want the gig?" I'm like, yes. So we moved to Stafford, Virginia, which is kind of where I ran into you, down in Fredericksburg area. And I was there for 20 years. And that group was just ridiculous. I mean, the West Point band was a fine band. The Army band is just in DC, Pershing Zone, just kicks it up a notch.
Yeah.
I mean, you have the Herald trumpets, you have the Army chorus, the Army orchestra. So I did that gig for 20 years, retiring as their chief arranger. And it was, I only have a bachelor's degree. I have a bachelor's degree, music education.
Okay.
I tell people I got my master's at West Point with the West Point band, and I got my doctorate with the Army band, the School of Hard Knocks, because you write a chart, and if you write something that's not appropriate for the players, they let you know right away.
Right.
and they know where you park your car. But it was great because I got a lot of experience writing for strings, got to learn how to write for harp. Just every day you're writing every day. That's your full-time job. So it was great. So I had 26 years total doing that for the Army.
But you also said, kind of going into that, you were gigging a lot as a trumpet player.
I was before I joined the Army.
Is that kind of where you wet your feet with the arranging stuff? Because you obviously kind of going into West Point, you had to have some type of background in that.
Right. I had always liked arranging. I wrote my first chart in 7th grade, and it was awful. Um, I was in group lessons. Um, all the seventh graders, they just, if you had a free period, so there was like a couple of baritones, a tuba, a couple trumpets, clarinets. And I remember having this book called The Funway Band Method, which basically I think Edmonds or Edmondson did this thing. And it was basically the melody to pop tunes written for everybody had the melody.
Right.
So my first chart, I liked the group Chicago, obviously, because it had trumpets,
Yeah.
and there was a song 25 or 6 to 4,
Yeah.
and I had the melody to that, and I didn't know about instrument transpositions. I didn't know about bass clef. The only thing I knew about harmony was the kid that was playing second trumpet in front of me was usually a space or a line higher than me, and the kid playing first was a space or a line higher than him. So I just figured harmony was stacked thirds.
Yeah.
So I took the melody da 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 da, and I just harmonized it diatonically, parallel, and I wrote it out. No bass clef, no transpositions. I walk into this seventh grade group lesson, and I announce to the director, "I've written an arrangement." And he looks at me like, "What?" He goes, "Go ahead and conduct it." I'm like, "I don't know how to do that." He goes, "Floor, window, ceiling. Just go like that." So I handed it out and I counted it off, and it was god awful. I mean, if you can imagine, it just sounded like a mess. I'm like, what? It should sound good. And he said, "I think you need to learn transpositions and harmony." So the next period was actually band rehearsal. So I went out, and this girl that sat next to me, she also played the organ, and I told her about my experience, and she had an organ book sitting on the floor. I can still see it. She reached down and she opened the back page, and there was just a list of chords, major, minor seventh, all that stuff. She tore the back page out and said, "I think this is what you need."
Wow.
So,
Okay.
so that's the first chart I wrote, and I kept trying it, and I got better, and I learned the harmony. A big break for me was 10th grade. I went to high school, and two of the best jazz musicians in my little town taught at this high school. And the one guy was a choir director, and I wrote a chart for the chorus one day. I said, "Hey, I wrote this, and if you let me come in and conduct it." He said, "Oh, that's pretty good." He says, "I think you need to get arranging lessons." And I said, "Well, my parents aren't going to pay for that." He goes, "Yeah, don't worry about that." So he called a guy in our local town who had been to Eastman and went to all these writing things every summer, used to go to the Kenton clinics, was a really good jazz writer. And he was a music educator in our town, did like elementary band or something, and really great jazz writer.
Right.
And this guy picked me up on a Saturday morning, paid for my first lesson. So I ended up starting arranging lessons in 10th grade, and I went every Saturday for 3 years. Saturday morning, we'd listen to records, discuss techniques, and he'd say, "Okay, go write 16 bars of a sax solo, or go write 16 bars of brass." And Monday night, he and the rest of the band directors in our area had a rehearsal band, really good big band. So I would Monday night show up with my chart copied, wait till the end of rehearsal, put my cassette recorder on the piano, hand out the chart, and count it off. And that was great experience.
Yeah.
So those guys really, I mean, all my band directors, I tell people, I feel like I was like you watch rugby games where they take the rugby ball and they pass it around like this. I feel like I was the rugby ball, and this band director handed me to this guy, and then this band director handed me here, and this, but yeah, I got a lot of really good experience. So by the time got to college, I had already written a ton of charts. I was making extra money. I went to Duquesne University in Pittsburgh, and was making extra money writing charts for local bands.
Wow.
So, and then I got into doing the high school marching band scene. There was a big band in Pittsburgh that was big in the BOA circuit back in the 80s, Norwin High School Band. And I used to write for them. And we used to write for their jazz band too. A lot of high schools in Pittsburgh. So I got a lot of marching experience, which was a big part of the West Point band, because they have Army football. So we would have to write 5 or 6 complete football shows every year, not just one, but
Right.
5. So that's where I got a lot of my experience,
Gotcha.
before joining the Army.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's cool. So, you know, as a band director, we do a lot of, whether it's rewriting parts or maybe we have an idea, maybe we have this weird group of instruments that are best friends and they want to play together and stuff like that. So,
Right.
it's kind of an inherent part of the job to kind of delve into the arranging aspect. What are some of the things that you might offer as advice, or do you have like resources that you would really recommend?
Well, I mean, all my life I've made a practice of reading every single arranging book I can get my hands on. It
Okay.
doesn't matter who wrote it, and it may be a rehash of old material, but you may find a little nugget that you never
Yeah.
thought of before. So I mean, that's a thing I always do. I mean, I have books from the early 1900s, 1940s,
Okay.
and every once in a while I'll just read those things, go back and read them just
Yeah.
to reinforce. The big thing I will tell people who want to do this kind of thing, and this is coming from a brass player's perspective, um, the smaller the mouthpiece, the more rest you need to give to those instruments.
Okay.
Whether it's a marching band or a big band, save your trumpets for when you really need them.
Right.
The great arranger Don Sebesky, in his arranging book says, economy. Use only what you need to achieve the effect. Save your resources for when you really need them. And I'll just, a lot of piano players or sometimes saxophone players will write a chart and they don't know what that piece of metal feels like on your
Right.
face. And like I said, the smaller the mouthpiece, the more rest. French horns, mellophones, trumpets, I mean, it's the size of a dime. You're dealing with trombones, euphoniums, tubas. You got a bigger area. You can beat them up a little bit more. And I will tell people that when I've done arranging clinics for people, and I'll say, hey, listen, sax players, you guys can play all day. You're almost like string players. Yeah, you may get a little sore, but you're not going to get really beat up. And trombones, yeah, I feel you, but, you're going to play more than the trumpets,
Right.
So that's one thing. And if you're writing for like a jazz band or a pep band, don't be afraid to use just the rhythm section, for a little bit to give everybody a break.
Right.
Don't be afraid of unison. A lot of people jump in and say, oh, I need to harmonize this. Nah, maybe you don't. Maybe you have a big intro that's harmonized. Then you're going to come down and maybe it's just rhythm section and unison trombones or saxophones and octaves. Nothing fancy, the melody.
Right.
With some stuff behind it. So that gives you can make a shape. And I tell people a lot of times when I sit down to write a chart, sometimes your client, whether it's a band director or a singer or whoever, says, hey, I need this to be 3 minutes and 10 seconds long. Okay.
Right.
And it's got to feature this and blah, blah, blah. So a lot of times the first thing you write is not a note. You write 0, 0, 0, 3 minutes and 10 seconds. And then you map out the form, the tune. It's an AAB tune. Okay, intro, AABA. Are you going to DS back? Are you going to do a solo? Are you going to modulate? So you have an idea, like a topographical picture of the timeline, the chart. And that can help you when you're starting to do a chart or even an original piece. The architecture of it before you start any notes.
Yeah.
And the other
That's a
thing
good point. You're really kind of digging in and kind of thinking about the bigger concept and having that overarching approach to it. It kind of gives you a structure within which you can be creative.
Sure. And I remember a guy at West Point who was an older guy, and he would pop in from time to time as I was writing, and he would, ask me what my process was. And I said, oh, I just start here and I go here. And he's the first one that said, you should think about planning these things out. Otherwise, you're going to paint yourself into a corner.
Right.
It's like if you're laying floor tile in a room and you start at the wrong place, you get back here and you've got no escape because you've either painted or tiled yourself into a corner, and you've got to throw that work that you thought was so great away and figure a
Right.
way out of it, you know? So those things are really important. The other thing is the key, picking the key. If you pick the right key, and when I say the right key, okay, if you're writing for brass, you know, you don't want to write in the key of E.
Right.
You don't, you know, E concert, A concert. You want to look for keys: B flat, F, E flat, A flat. But also look for the key and that shape of the tune or the arrangement where the biggest impact is. If it's a band, you're going to want your trumpets in a good tessitura where they have power. All the
Yeah.
instruments, basically, where they have power at that high point. And if you find that that spot, and as you're writing, if you have the form, doesn't mean you have to start writing here at the beginning. You could say, hey, here's the high point of the chart. I'm going to write this first, and then I'll know where I'm headed.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I've got the right key, and the trumpets are sitting right here. First trumpet's on G right above the staff. Flutes are an octave higher, concert F. There's room for a French horn line here because it's in a good register. There's room for the trombones to be spaced out underneath. If you find that high point of the chart and you score that effectively, whether it's the end of the chart or the middle of the chart, you can go back to the beginning of the chart and think, A, how do I get from point A to point B, and how do I use what resources I have effectively, and how do I make sure that these trumpet players are fresh
Right.
when they hit this spot? You know,
going back to what you were saying about making sure we got the rest.
Yes, yeah, it's so important. And the other thing, and this is just a weird quirk in my mind, I realize my chart isn't the only thing on the concert. Okay, a lot of people will say, you shouldn't worry about that. Yeah, maybe not. But if you write a chart that's wall-to-wall FaceTime for the trumpets, you may have just crapped all over the concert because those kids, you know, young kids, they're going to be beat up. So if you can be a responsible citizen as an arranger or composer and say, hey, I really need these guys here, but I don't need to beat them up. And that gives you an opportunity to say, hey, clarinet's got it here, euphoniums have it here, French horns. That's another thing. Try to mix it up and give everybody some melodic material, a little place to shine, because we all know different instruments have different jobs. You know, tuba's going to be playing the bass line, trumpets are going to have the melody, but it doesn't always have to be that way.
Right.
So look for opportunities, be creative that way, and think about endurance, and not just endurance in your piece, but perhaps the bigger picture. Take a step back. Hey, where's this going to go in the concert? You know?
Yeah.
So,
good points.
Those are things that I think about every time I sit down to write a chart. You know, who am I writing for? How long is it? The other thing is make sure you're writing something that the audience wants to hear. And I'll just say this because sometimes arrangers or composers are doing this, and I could be wrong in this, but for their own amusement or their own amazement. Hey, look how cool this is, or look how hard this is. Does the audience want to hear it? Do the kids want to play it? Whether they're kids or they're adults.
Right.
Are they having fun? You know, is the juice worth the squeeze?
Right.
You know? Yeah, to me, that's really important. Writing music that the audience wants to hear, because if you have no audience, you got nobody to play for, you might as well go do something else.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
And,
good point.
And the last thing I'll say is I never try to write anything hard just for hard's sake. You know, I don't want to make anything harder than it has to be. And I tell people all the time, I don't want to write anything that I don't want to play.
Okay. Yeah.
So just think about that. If you're writing a chart or you're putting something together for kids, you know, put yourself in those shoes.
Yeah.
Their shoes.
Yeah. Good points. So we talked about your career as an arranger composer, and given us some great tips on if we're looking to get into arranging, some thoughts there. But as I mentioned at the beginning, you're a great trumpet player. What are some of the things that is what what are some of your experiences with trumpet, and are you still playing and stuff like that?
Um, I still am playing, which is great for me. Like I said, I moved to a new area. I lived in the Northern Virginia area for over 20 years. And as you well know, there's the Army Band, Navy Band, all of the service bands are there.
Yeah,
The
great
bench,
musicians.
yeah, the bench is deep, you know. Um, so there's, 200 great trumpet players. You know, for me moving down here, I was worried that I wasn't going to find anything to play in. And I was lucky enough to find basically three ensembles. There's a really good group, Wilmington Symphonic Winds up in Wilmington. Uh,
Yeah,
the conductor is great, Dominic Talanka.
yeah.
Really good. They play hard literature. I mean, I have to practice, a lot to make that. And it's a rotating trumpet section, which is great. So everybody gets a chance. I've also started playing in the North Myrtle Beach Community Band. And actually, they're celebrating their 25th year, and they actually commissioned me to write a piece for them.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, and it was due to be performed March 21st and March 22nd, but with the
Yeah,
coronavirus,
yeah.
that got put off. But the piece is being published by Hal Leonard. It should be available this summer, late summer. It's a piece called "The Land Called Shakoora."
Okay,
It's about the early settlement of North and South Carolina. But
nice.
that's a great group. And they also have a big band that's kind of an offshoot. It's called the Stardusters, and I've started playing with them. So I'm finding time to play trumpet. When I started playing trumpet in fifth grade, and didn't really have any teachers other than your lesson, your weekly lesson, until I got to seventh grade. Then I took some lessons from the middle school band director until my parents decided they weren't going to pay for it. My parents weren't very supportive. Uh, they told me music makes a nice hobby. My mother wanted me to be an architect.
Okay.
I thought I was going to be an architect till about my senior year in high school, and I was gigging. I had good chops, and I didn't study with anybody, but I had good teachers, and I joined the Musicians Union in Johnstown at age 16, and
Nice.
played dance band gigs. If the Ice Capades came to town, I got to play for the Ice Capades. I played in rock bands, dance bands, church gigs. I mean, it was great. By the
Yeah.
time I went to college, I had played a ton of gigs. Hadn't really studied with anybody, but um, my plans were to go to either University of North Texas, it was called North Texas State at that time,
Right.
or Towson, Berkeley, or University of Miami. And about 2 weeks before the end of high school, in gym class, I got popped in the chops, and I was playing 5 nights a week with a funk band in like
Oh, wow.
1978, and I lost an octave in one day.
No kidding.
Yes, I mean it was I didn't know any better. I got popped. I had swelling. I went and played anyway. I had a gig that night. Um, and we're playing like Tower Power stuff,
Yeah.
Confunction, LTD, Earth, Wind, and Fire, which I could do all that stuff. All of a sudden, I couldn't do any of it. I could do it down an octave.
Right.
So I changed my plans, and a friend of mine recommended I talk to the teachers at Duquesne University because they had a good reputation for being able to rehabilitate you if you had some issues,
Okay.
which all of a sudden I had issues. I couldn't play.
Yeah.
Um, I went and saw Eddie Shiner, who was a professor of trumpet at Duquesne University, on the recommendation of one of his students who I sat next to the year before in All-State Band, in Pennsylvania All-State Band. And so I go in for my audition, and Mr. Shiner says, "Yeah, Ralph says you play pretty good, or you did, but you had an accident." And I said, "Yeah." He says, "Well, what are you going to play?" And I tried to play some etude. I couldn't play a G at the top of the staff.
Oh, wow.
And he let me go on for a while, and he was very kind. He says, "Okay." He says, "So that's enough." He says, "Ralph says you can play jazz." I said, "Yeah, I do okay." And he says, "Well, what do you want to play?" He had a piano in his studio, and I called some tune, and he sat down and knew the changes to it. played, let me play the head, improvise. And when I was done, he says, okay, I think we'll do something with you. We'll get you fixed up. We're going to put you with Patsy Oliver, which was Mr. Shiner's first student, who had also been through some chop issues. So long story short, I went to Duquesne, had my teeth moved because that was one of their things where they worked with your dental structure, changed my embouchure. 4 years later, I could play professionally again.
Wow.
I didn't have the range that I once had up to about G, but I was good on big equipment to a high D, like all night.
Yeah.
And that was plenty to work, you know.
Right.
So I got out of college and I started working with bands around Pittsburgh. Eventually worked up and down the East Coast playing, 5, 6, 7 nights a week until I joined the Army.
Yeah.
I put the trumpet on the back burner. Then it did really become a hobby because my job was to write music,
Yeah.
But I still play. And I love to play. I go up to DC. I play with a group called the Texas Chainsaw Horns.
Yeah.
Which we did have a lot of gigs this spring and this summer. But they're starting to go by the wayside. So hopefully we'll get back to that. But that's a really great group. Yeah.
That's awesome. So what is that group for people that aren't in the region? Tell us a little bit about it.
Basically, it's a blue-eyed soul rhythm section that's been around the DC area for 40 years, really seasoned rhythm section and vocalists, and then a 5-piece horn section. Nice. And the horn players are all from the service bands. Ken McGee, who's one of the lead players with the Army Blues. Ken lives down in Stafford. He's the lead player. I play second and write the charts. Eli Gonzalez is a tenor player in the Army band. Justin Polyblank is the saxophone in the Army band. He plays Barry. And we have a female trombone player who's the leader of the Navy Commodores, Jen Krupa. So it's a 5-piece horn section, 2 trumpets, tenor, bone, and Barry. And it's a load of fun.
So what you're saying is that horn section doesn't suck.
Yeah, it's if Ken can't make it, our subs include guys like Brian McDonald, lead player of the Airmen and Note, Whitaker, former lead player of the Jazz Ambassadors, Thomas Eby, the lead player from the Navy Commodores. I mean, the rotation of trumpet players that play lead, we just call it stunt trumpet. It's the stunt trumpet. But it's great because you're standing next to these people. And I won't use any names, but on one gig, it's the first gig this guy was subbing for Ken on, end of the night, the last tune, and it's a blow. It's a 4-hour blow, and it's loud, and it's on your face. He looks at me, he goes, hey, that high C at the end, do you mind if I take it up to a double C? I'm like, why are you asking? He goes, well, you wrote the chart. And I said, well, that's very kind. I said, yeah, do whatever you want. So I'm figuring it's the last tune. He's going to go, well, he just comes in, psst, boom, double C, doesn't hang over, just nails it perfectly in tune. That's what I mean by the bench is so deep.
Yeah.
I mean, I've been on big band gigs up there where I'm playing fourth, which is right where I should be. And there's 3 lead players playing first, second, and third, from the and the downbeat, you're just like, oh my God, this is a lot of fun.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, Paul, I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to everybody today. It's been a blast getting to see you again. We don't run into each other now that we're kind of apart, but it was great seeing you. And thank you for sharing some ideas and letting us learn a little bit more about you.
All right, man. Great talking to you. And hopefully we'll see you again sometime soon.
Sounds good. Thanks, Paul.
Thanks. Bye.